My name is Shireen Daibis, and I am a writer, director, actor, and one of the producers of the film All That's Left of You that's in the premiere section.
My name is Maria Drake. I'm playing the role of Monira, a mother in the 1948, who's struggling to raise her kids on her own after her husband's missing.
So I'm really looking forward to this conversation because the film is beautifully told. Shireen, you're the writer, the director, and you are the star of the center of the film of this multi-generational family that goes through displacement in 1948 and takes you through the history of this conflict, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the Palestinian national cause, from a very personal, intimate, here's the story of one family and what happened to them, and from the Palestinian perspective. And this film is coming out at a time when emotions are very high. We're talking on a day when 4 Israeli hostages were released, 4 women. And the Palestinians of northern Gaza are now being supposedly allowed to go back to their homes, and there's a ceasefire in place. So, it's like after so many months of horrific news, you must have started this film well before October 7th. So can you tell us why you started to make this film? And is this the story of your own family or just a familiar story to many Palestinian families?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I started writing this film in 2020. It had been with me for such a long time. I felt it's partly inspired by my own family, and it's partly inspired by stories that I've just, lived with. But basically, my father is a Palestinian refugee who lived most of his life in exile. He had to get foreign citizenship in order to just return to visit his family and the only home he'd ever known. So I grew up feeling his longing for a place and kind of understanding it through him. But I also, I grew up mostly in the diaspora, but going back and forth to Jordan and Palestine, the West Bank, which is where my father's from. And so I got a window into what life was like for Palestinians, and I saw some things that made really an indelible, kind of had an indelible impact on me. I saw my father humiliated at borders and checkpoints. My first time actually traveling to Palestine was when I was 8 years old, and my family was held at the border between Jordan and the West Bank for 12 hours. The contents of our suitcases were picked through. The soldiers ordered all of us to be strip searched, including my baby sisters, age 3 and 1. And my father, who's humiliated, confronted the soldiers, and they started screaming at him, and I was just convinced they were going to kill him. So this was one of my first experiences of what it meant to be Palestinian, and the story really stayed with me. So there's what I saw and what I lived through my own experience and my father, and really wanting to kind of honor him and people like him, and tell the story of how Palestinians became refugees, because it was a story I felt was missing from the landscape. And then there were the stories that I didn't live, but I lived with, and that lived in me. And there were stories from before I was born, from 1948, from 1967. And I always wondered why people didn't know the Palestinian perspective of what happened to us and how that impacted us over generations. And I just really wanted to tell that story so that people could understand the origin, basically tell the Palestinian origin story so that people could better understand the Palestinian perspective.
Well, I mean, the problem is there is not a lot of agreement today over what the origin story is. And you have people who say Palestinians don't exist, and you have people who say Palestinians should need the land from the river to the sea. And then there's people who are real people like your family who are just trying to exist and trying to have a normal life, and it's not possible when you're a refugee, and it's not possible when you have a political situation that's unresolved, that's outside your ability to fix it.
Right.
So I think what this brought to the table was a very nuanced portrait of what happens in wartime, in political conflict, when the political leaders cannot resolve something.
Exactly. And that's really what I wanted to do, was really show the impact on families. This is a movie about a lived experience, and it is entirely based on it's inspired by many true stories. It's based on historical fact. And, I really just wanted to focus on the lived experience and to show people kind of the origins of Palestinian suffering. So, we're living in a very polarizing time, but I want to unite people through the film and through just, like you said, we're living in a time where politicians can't get it together. And frankly, I think politicians have failed us. And I think the only way forward is for us to see each other's humanity. Like we need to be, I want the movie to inspire faith and hope in a collective humanity. And I want the movie to bring people together to have conversations that perhaps are difficult. That was my intention in making it. And to hopefully then heal, like for us to try to heal not just the intergenerational trauma within my own, within my own community and, my people, but I want us to heal on a more collective level. One of the things that the movie does is it talks about the interconnectivity between Palestinians and the Jewish people and how our suffering is intertwined, our safety is intertwined, and we need each other at this point. And I just, I want to put the politics aside and I want to have, human conversations one-on-one with people.
Yeah, I want to also come to where we are in today's timeline of the conflict. But first I want to ask Maria, talk a little bit about your character, what you do, and also I'm curious how much you knew about this history or this conflict at all before you did this movie.
Yeah, of course. So I'm familiar because I'm Palestinian. My grandmother is Palestinian. My grandfather is Palestinian, and the story is talking about the historical events that happened in '48. So my grandmother had to flee to Lebanon, and she was engaged to one of the men in the village. And while she flew with her
From where?
From the Upper Galilee. It's a village, small village called Ailabun. It's a Christian village, Palestinian village. So she flew to Lebanon, and months later, she was lucky to come back to Palestine when not a lot of people were able to come back. So she came back to Palestine, and she found out that her fiance was killed in Ailabun. So I'm really familiar with the story, and this is the story of my grandfather.
Is your family still there in the Galilee?
Yes.
Oh, is that where you are from?
I'm from Haifa.
You're from
but
Haifa?
Yeah,
okay.
My parents are like my uncles and grandparents are still there.
So do you consider yourself an Israeli Arab? Do you consider yourself a Palestinian
Israeli,
or what?
Palestinian.
Palestinian. But are you an Israeli citizen?
I am.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have all of the complexities.
Yes, and on the other side, my grandmother, she's Holocaust survivor. She's from
What do you
Poland.
mean on the other side?
So my grandmother.
Side of her family.
Yeah, so my mom's, like my grandmother from my mom's side, she's a Holocaust survivor. She's from Poland. And to see the connection between my both grandmothers, it was amazing to see how they understood each other's suffering and pain, because they both lived horrific times during the war. And I think this film is what it's all about.
So is your mother is Palestinian and your father is Israeli Jew?
No. So my grandmother from my mom's side, she's a Holocaust survivor. She's from Poland. She came by the Exodus. Years later,
in 1947, she arrived, right?
Yes.
Yeah, in Palestine?
Yeah. And years later, she met my grandfather, who's Palestinian Christian. And they fell in love. They got married. And my mom was raised as Christian Arab. And she met my father, who's also a Palestinian Christian. They got married. And that's how we got here.
Well, I think that's such an amazing kind of capsule.
It is, right?
Of all of the realities
Yeah.
that happened, and just in your family history.
Yeah.
And
what's
here
so
you are.
Yeah. But what's so amazing too is, like, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a Palestinian who didn't see themselves in this film in some way, because it really is our collective story. That's something that's really been communicated, but I think also the film really speaks to larger themes of how we can overcome tragedy and personal loss, the extraordinary will that it takes to overcome tragedy and personal loss. So
when you see young people who are not Palestinian, not related at all, and probably funded by some quite extremist groups. What's your take on that? Here's your movie coming out at a time when the polarization is like at the maximum, and journalists like myself who spent a lot of years trying to help two sides understand each other. Someone like yourself has made this beautiful film that just says we're just people, kind of. We're just human beings and want to be treated with the dignity of a human being. When you see what's going on in the broader screaming debate, I'm just curious, how does that strike you?
I think, look, I made this movie with an intention to heal. And I think that recognition of suffering is one way to heal. And I think that because there's been so much denial of what happened to Palestinians in 1948, and, you mentioned it yourself, some people believe that Palestinians don't exist, and I think that perspective is incredibly damaging and dangerous. I think we need to learn from history, and we need to really recognize what human beings have been through and suffered. And that, I think that's it's just a tiny little step towards perhaps allowing people to be seen and heard, and maybe people putting down their guard a little bit. Like, I don't know how to speak to the larger polarization. And I'm not, a politician or a policy analyst. I'm really here to sell a movie and to talk about how we can try to come together and really just have conversations as people, putting the politics aside as much as possible and just saying, hey, listen, this is my experience. We have so many Nakba survivors. Nakba is, the word in Arabic for catastrophe. And that's what happened to Palestinians in 1948. And they tell their stories, and we have to listen. We have to listen to what happened. I really think that is a major step towards healing. I really do. So anything that we're seeing, any symptom that we're seeing, like, I think that there's just a lot of symptoms of a larger wound that needs to be recognized in order to be healed. And there's the passage of this trauma, which the movie shows, from one generation to another, that again, I think we need to recognize and look at so that we can, try to then do something about it. And, the movie takes on these really large, these are large things. Like, I'm looking to inspire healing in a film, and that's an ambitious goal. So I think I just want to focus on that, if you know what I mean, and just see what we can do if we are able to recognize what happened to people and how it's impacted them over generations. Let's just do that and see how that impacts young people today, and see how that then could change the conversation and maybe change the way that the way that people kind of view it.
Okay, they're telling me to wrap. I could talk to you for an hour.
I would love to keep talking to you. I really appreciate
do that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate
you.
you.
Thank you for sharing your
having
history.
us.
That was so
Absolutely.
amazing.
Thank you.
Wow. Shukran jazilan.
شكرا لك.